never too emotional. You were never too sensitive. You were never too attached. The painful truth is that you were simply available to people who only showed up when they needed something. And for a long time, you confused being needed with being loved. That is where the entire cycle began, because people think empaths suffer because they care too much, but that is not the real reason. Empaths suffer because they stay too long after the truth has already arrived. Maybe you know exactly what I mean. You meet someone and something feels different. They seem wounded, misunderstood, complicated. They tell you stories nobody else understands. They tell you how everyone abandoned them, how nobody stayed, how life has been unfair to them. And because you naturally feel what other people feel, something inside you immediately activates. You do not see danger. You see pain. You do not think, this person might hurt me. You think, this person needs me. And without realizing it, your entire nervous system starts building emotional investment before reality even has a chance to reveal itself. You answer messages immediately. You stay up late listening. You become patient. You become understanding. You excuse behavior that you would never normally accept. Because in your mind, compassion means loyalty. Understanding means love. And staying means strength. But then strange things start happening. They disappear for a few hours, then a few days, then they return acting completely normal. You feel confused. You tell yourself maybe they were busy, maybe something happened, maybe they are stressed, maybe they are overwhelmed. You become an expert creating explanations for behavior that already hurt you. And this is where many empaths unknowingly enter the most dangerous emotional loop of all, because when you care deeply, your brain does something very interesting. Instead of immediately protecting you, it begins searching for reasons to maintain connection. Psychologists have discovered that human beings hate losing emotional bonds. Even weak emotional attachments can create discomfort when threatened. The brain often prefers certainty over truth. And if losing someone feels painful enough, the mind will create stories that make staying easier than leaving. That means you slowly stop asking one question: is this healthy for me? And you replace it with another: how can I make this work? Those two questions look similar, but they create completely different lives, because one protects you, the other abandons you. And here is the hardest truth many empaths never hear. You were not chosen because of your kindness. You were chosen because your kindness had no boundaries. There are people in this world who unconsciously search for emotional safety while offering emotional instability in return. They do not always do this intentionally. Some are wounded. Some are avoidant. Some are manipulative. Some simply never learned how healthy connection works. But regardless of the reason, the result becomes the same. You give more, they give less. You explain more, they reveal less. You chase clarity, they create confusion. And because empaths naturally search for understanding instead of judgment, they stay inside situations long after their body already knows something feels wrong. And that is why some of the most emotionally exhausted people are not weak people. They are observant people who ignored themselves, because your body notices things long before your mind catches up. You notice the delayed replies. You notice the inconsistency. You notice that strange feeling in your chest after certain conversations. You notice the anxiety that appeared for no reason. You notice yourself becoming smaller, quieter, more careful, but you kept going anyway, because you thought love meant endurance. You thought understanding someone meant carrying them. You thought being patient would eventually make someone choose you. But pain has a strange way of teaching lessons that kindness never could, because eventually something changes. Eventually you stop asking why they hurt you, and you begin asking something much more dangerous. Why did I stay after I already knew? You probably thought the pain started when they left. You probably thought the damage happened when they stopped texting back, when they became distant, when they changed, when they pulled away and suddenly treated you like someone who meant nothing. But that is usually not where the real pain begins. The real pain starts much earlier. It starts during the moment you slowly begin betraying yourself. Because emotional pain rarely arrives all at once. It enters quietly, almost invisibly. It enters through tiny moments that seem too small to matter. A delayed reply that somehow changes your mood. A short message that suddenly feels colder than usual. A conversation that leaves you feeling strange, but you cannot explain why. Someone saying they care about you while their actions slowly begin saying something completely different. And at first you ignore it. You tell yourself you are overthinking. You tell yourself you are too sensitive. You tell yourself not to make problems where there are none. But your body continues noticing things even when your mind refuses to. Your nervous system notices inconsistency. Your nervous system notices emotional distance. Your nervous system notices uncertainty. Long before logic catches up, your body already starts preparing for danger. Suddenly you check your phone more often. Suddenly you reread old conversations. Suddenly you start analyzing things that never used to matter. You begin wondering if you said something wrong. You begin wondering if you became too much, too emotional, too available, too needy, too attached. And this is where the empath pain loop quietly begins. Because once emotional uncertainty enters the relationship, many empaths unconsciously start working harder instead of stepping back. Think about that for a second. Instead of asking why someone suddenly changed, you start asking how you can become easier to love. You become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. You give more energy, more time, more emotional space. Because somewhere inside you there is an old belief operating in the background. If I love harder, maybe things will return to how they were. If I become better, maybe they will stay. If I become easier, maybe they will stop pulling away. But there is a problem with this pattern. You cannot heal uncertainty by sacrificing yourself. You cannot create security by abandoning your own emotional needs. And many empaths spend years trying to do exactly that. They become emotional shapeshifters. They become experts at adjusting themselves around other people's moods, around other people's fears, around other people's wounds, around other people's instabilities. Slowly they stop asking themselves what they need. Slowly they stop noticing their own exhaustion because survival mode has taken over. And survival mode does not ask whether something feels good. Survival mode only asks one question: how do I stop losing this person? But here is the painful irony. The harder you chase emotional certainty from emotionally unavailable people, the more emotionally unstable you start becoming yourself. The anxiety grows, the overthinking grows, the emotional exhaustion grows, and eventually you no longer recognize the person you became because you were never actually fighting for love, you were fighting for emotional safety. And there is a massive difference between those two things. Love brings peace. Survival creates obsession. Love feels calm. Survival feels desperate. Love allows breathing. Survival keeps your nervous system waiting for the next emotional storm. And one day you wake up and realize something terrifying. You have spent so much time trying not to lose someone else that somewhere along the way you completely lost yourself. Most people think empaths stay too long because they are weak. They think empaths stay because they are desperate, because they are dependent, because they are afraid to be alone. But that explanation misses something important. Empaths do not usually stay because they are weak. They stay because they understand too much. And sometimes understanding becomes dangerous when it has no boundaries, because empathy has a hidden side that very few people talk about. Empathy allows you to see pain inside other people. But if you are not careful, it also makes you ignore pain inside yourself. Think about how many times you have done this before. Someone hurts you, and instead of asking why they did it, you immediately begin trying to understand what happened to them. Maybe they had a difficult childhood. Maybe they have trust issues. Maybe they are stressed. Maybe they are afraid of getting close. Maybe they are emotionally unavailable because someone hurt them years ago. Suddenly, the focus shifts completely. You stop looking at the wound they created inside you and begin investigating the wound inside them. That sounds compassionate, that sounds kind, but there is a hidden problem inside that pattern, because when understanding becomes excessive, accountability disappears, And once accountability disappears, unhealthy relationships quietly begin growing roots. You start tolerating things you never thought you would tolerate. Small disrespect becomes normal. Emotional inconsistency becomes normal. Confusion becomes normal. Being ignored becomes normal. Feeling anxious becomes normal. Walking on emotional eggshells becomes normal. Eventually, your nervous system adapts to emotional instability so deeply that peace itself starts feeling unfamiliar. That is one of the strangest things emotional pain can do. Human beings adapt to environments constantly. If you spend enough time inside chaos, your brain slowly begins treating chaos as reality. Suddenly, calm feels boring, stability feels strange, healthy love feels almost suspicious. And many empaths never realize this is happening while it is happening. Because emotional adaptation happens slowly, almost invisibly. Imagine putting your hand under cold water. The shock feels immediate. You notice it instantly, but imagine the temperature slowly changing over time. You might not even notice how much it changed until something finally wakes you up. Relationships can work exactly the same way. The emotional exhaustion rarely arrives in one dramatic moment. It usually arrives through tiny compromises repeated hundreds of times. One ignored feeling, one excuse, one broken boundary, one moment where you told yourself this is okay, even though something deep inside you already knew it was not. And here is where many empaths become trapped. Because the more energy you invest emotionally, the harder walking away becomes. Psychologists call this emotional investment bias. Human beings naturally struggle to leave situations where they already invested large amounts of time, attention, love, and emotional energy, because leaving creates a painful feeling. It creates the feeling that everything meant nothing. So instead of leaving, many people continue investing even more. They think maybe if I give a little more time, things will change. Maybe if I become more patient, things will improve. Maybe if I love harder, something will finally click. But unhealthy cycles survive through hope. Hope is beautiful in healthy relationships. Hope becomes dangerous inside unhealthy ones, because hope can convince people to remain inside situations that are slowly destroying them. And that is why many empaths stay long after their intuition already started screaming. Not because they cannot see the truth, but because they keep believing understanding someone will eventually make that person understand them back. And sometimes that never happens. Sometimes the hardest lesson an empath ever learns is realizing that understanding someone does not automatically mean they are capable of loving you the way you deserve. There comes a moment in almost every empath's life that feels confusing because nothing dramatic seems to happen on the outside, but everything starts changing on the inside. You still smile, you still go to work, you still answer messages, you still show up for people. From the outside, nothing looks different. But inside your body, something has quietly started shifting, because repeated emotional disappointment does not only change feelings, it changes patterns inside the nervous system itself. At first, every painful experience feels separate. One betrayal feels like one betrayal. One rejection feels like one rejection. One disappointment feels like one disappointment. But the brain does not store emotional experiences the way people think. Your nervous system starts collecting evidence. It starts connecting emotional dots beneath conscious awareness. It starts creating internal predictions designed for survival. Think about a person walking through a forest. If they walk through the same path every day and one day they suddenly see danger appear from behind a tree, something changes. The next time they walk through that path, they become more alert. The next time after that, they become even more aware. Eventually they start scanning every tree automatically before danger even appears. Human emotions work similarly. The brain is constantly asking one question beneath awareness. What happened before, and how do I avoid it happening again? And when emotional pain repeats itself enough times, the nervous system begins creating protective shortcuts. Suddenly, you notice yourself reacting differently. You receive a message, and before even opening it, you feel tension in your chest. Someone says they miss you, and instead of feeling warmth, you feel suspicion. Someone pulls away emotionally, and immediately anxiety starts appearing before your mind even understands why. You think something is wrong with you because your reactions seem stronger than they used to be, but what you are experiencing is often not weakness, it is adaptation. The body learns patterns faster than the conscious mind does. That is why many people become confused after emotional pain. They say things like, I used to trust people easily, I used to feel relaxed around others, I used to feel safe opening up, and now I do not recognize myself anymore. But here is the reality very few people talk about. You did not become broken, you became protective. Because the nervous system has one primary responsibility above everything else: survival. It does not care about romance. It does not care about fantasy. It does not care about the future you imagine with someone. It only cares about preventing pain from repeating itself. And this is where many empaths begin changing in ways they never expected. They start noticing things they ignored before. Tiny changes in behavior suddenly feel louder. Small inconsistencies suddenly stand out. Energy shifts inside conversations suddenly become impossible to ignore. They notice delayed responses. They notice emotional distance. They notice forced affection. They notice fake concern hidden beneath words that sound kind. Sometimes they even start noticing tension before they consciously understand what created it. And this becomes terrifying because they start asking themselves a painful question. Was I always seeing these things and simply ignoring them before? And the answer is often yes, because when people desperately want connection, they unconsciously filter information differently. They focus on hope instead of evidence. They focus on potential instead of reality. They focus on who someone could become instead of who they repeatedly show themselves to be. But pain changes perception. Pain removes fantasy slowly. Pain removes illusions slowly. Pain forces the nervous system to become more selective about trust. And eventually something strange happens. You stop feeling emotionally safe around people who once felt familiar, not because you suddenly stopped loving them, but because your body finally stopped lying to you. Something strange starts happening the moment an empath begins changing. The people around them start changing too. And this confuses many empaths because they think becoming healthier should automatically improve their relationships. They think stronger boundaries should create stronger connections. They think becoming emotionally aware should create peace. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it creates the exact opposite, because not everyone connected to you is connected to the real you. Some people were connected to the version of you that had unlimited access, the version of you that always answered immediately, the version of you that always forgave, the version of you that tolerated disrespect because you wanted to understand everyone, the version of you that ignored your own needs so nobody else would feel uncomfortable, the version of you that abandoned yourself to keep other people close. And the moment that version starts disappearing, something begins happening around you. Suddenly people say you changed. Suddenly people say you became distant. Suddenly people say you became difficult. Suddenly people say you became cold. At first, those words hurt deeply because empaths naturally want harmony. They naturally want understanding. They naturally want people around them to feel safe. So hearing that you change can feel painful. You begin questioning yourself again. Am I becoming selfish? Am I becoming too guarded? Am I becoming someone I never wanted to become? But here is something very important that many people never realize. Boundaries reveal relationships. Because healthy people usually respect your boundaries. Unhealthy people often react to them. Think about that carefully. The moment you stop over-explaining yourself, certain people become uncomfortable. The moment you stop chasing, certain people become distant. The moment you stop giving endless emotional energy, certain people suddenly accuse you of becoming different. Why? Because if someone becomes used to receiving constant emotional access from you, they begin treating that access as normal, not as a privilege. And when that access suddenly changes, people feel the difference immediately. Some people adjust, some people respect it, but others begin pushing harder. They text more aggressively. They guilt trip more intensely. They create confusion. They create pressure. They suddenly become emotional after showing little emotion before. They suddenly act afraid of losing you after behaving carelessly for months. And this creates one of the most confusing experiences for an empath, because part of you wants to believe they finally care. Part of you wants to believe they finally understand your value. But another part of you starts noticing something uncomfortable. They are reacting to losing access, not reacting to losing you. There is a difference between missing a person and missing control over a pattern. And emotionally unavailable people often struggle when familiar patterns disappear. Not necessarily because they deeply loved you, but because uncertainty creates discomfort. Suddenly the emotional balance changes. Suddenly you are no longer chasing. Suddenly you are no longer explaining yourself endlessly. Suddenly you are no longer carrying the relationship emotionally by yourself, and now they feel something you felt for a very long time. Instability, confusion, uncertainty, silence, and silence becomes powerful because silence forces people to sit with what they can no longer control. And that is why some people panic the moment an empath starts healing, not because the empath became dangerous, but because the empath finally stopped being available at the cost of themselves. The transformation never happens in one dramatic moment. There is no movie scene where you suddenly wake up and become a completely different person overnight. The shift is quieter than that, much quieter. It begins through tiny changes almost nobody notices except you. One day you stop explaining yourself as much. One day you stop sending the second message. One day you stop trying to fix every uncomfortable silence. One day you stop feeling responsible for emotions that were never yours to carry. At first these changes feel strange because for so long your identity was connected to being available. You were the listener. You were the fixer. You were the person people came to when life became heavy. You were the safe place. And for years you probably believed that giving endlessly was proof of love. You believed being needed meant being valuable. You believed sacrificing your own peace meant being a good person. But eventually something inside you starts asking a question you never asked before. What happens if I stop carrying everyone? And at first that question creates guilt, because empaths often confuse boundaries with rejection. They confuse self-protection with selfishness. They confuse distance with cruelty. So when they begin pulling back emotionally, they feel uncomfortable. They wonder if they are becoming cold. They wonder if pain changed them too much. They wonder if they are becoming the same people who once hurt them. But something interesting starts happening during this stage. You begin noticing how much of your energy was never actually yours. You begin noticing how exhausted you felt after certain conversations. You begin noticing how certain people only appeared when they needed comfort. You begin noticing how some relationships felt like emotional jobs instead of emotional connections. You begin noticing that some people knew how to receive your love but never learned how to return it. And suddenly silence begins entering your life in places where chaos once existed. You stop forcing conversations. You stop chasing emotional reassurance. You stop fighting to keep connections alive that only survived because you were holding them together alone. And at first the silence feels empty because human beings become attached to familiar emotional patterns even when those patterns hurt them. If chaos existed long enough inside your life, peace can feel uncomfortable at first. Your mind starts searching for problems. Your body starts expecting disappointment. You almost feel guilty for relaxing, but slowly something else starts happening. You start sleeping differently. You start breathing differently. You start waking up without immediately thinking about someone else's mood. You start noticing small things around you again. Music sounds different. Mornings feel different. Quiet feels different. Because for the first time in a long time, your nervous system is no longer surviving. It is recovering. And this is where the transformation becomes powerful. Because healed empaths do not become less loving. They become more selective. They still care deeply. They still understand pain. They still feel compassion. But now there is something standing between their heart and everyone else's chaos. Awareness. They finally understand that empathy does not require self-abandonment. Love does not require suffering. Understanding someone does not require sacrificing yourself. And that realization changes everything. Because now the empath who once chased emotional certainty from everyone else slowly begins finding it inside themselves. And eventually the moment arrives that changes everything. Not because somebody apologized, not because somebody finally understood your value, not because somebody suddenly became the person you spent years hoping they would become. It changes because something inside you becomes tired in a way words can barely describe. Not physically tired, emotionally tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying conversations alone. The kind of exhaustion that comes from explaining yourself repeatedly. The kind of exhaustion that comes from giving love to people who only seem to notice your value when they felt you slipping away. Because every empath eventually reaches a point where the pain of staying becomes heavier than the fear of leaving. And until that moment arrives, many people remain trapped for years. They continue hoping, they continue waiting, they continue trying to save relationships that have quietly been surviving on their effort alone. But once that invisible line is crossed, something strange happens. The chase disappears, the anxiety disappears, the need to explain disappears, the desperate need for closure disappears, and people around you often become confused by it. Because for so long they only knew the version of you that kept reaching out, the version of you that kept understanding, the version of you that kept giving one more chance. Then suddenly everything becomes quiet. You stop fighting for attention, you stop forcing conversations, you stop proving your worth. You stop asking people to see things they clearly do not want to see. And people often misunderstand this stage completely. They think the empath stopped caring. They think the empath became cold. They think the empath suddenly lost feelings overnight. But that is rarely true, because empaths usually do not leave emotionally in one moment. They leave emotionally in thousands of tiny moments where they felt unseen, tiny moments where they felt unheard, tiny moments where they felt alone while standing beside someone they loved. By the time an empath finally walks away physically, they often started leaving emotionally a long time ago. That is why when they finally leave, they sometimes leave quietly. No screaming, no dramatic speeches, no revenge, no emotional chaos, just silence. And silence becomes powerful because silence usually means something ended inside them long before anyone else noticed. Because healed empaths eventually understand something life-changing. They understand that not everyone deserves unlimited access to their heart. They understand that protecting peace is not selfish. They understand that love should not require constant suffering. They understand that healthy relationships do not force you to abandon yourself to keep someone else close. And maybe this is the part people fear most, because the healed empath is not dangerous because they became colder. They are dangerous because they finally stop betraying themselves. They no longer panic when someone pulls away. They no longer chase people who create confusion. They no longer mistake emotional intensity for genuine love. They no longer sacrifice inner peace just to avoid losing someone. And suddenly their entire life begins changing, because once desperation disappears, something else quietly takes its place: self-respect. And people become incredibly powerful the moment they stop needing external validation to feel valuable, because now they finally understand something that emotional pain spent years trying to teach them. You were never too much. You were simply giving too much to people who were never capable of holding what you carried inside you.